Hi, I'm Amanda Blair, Extension Meat Science Specialist at South Dakota State University, and today I'm here talking with Adam Rohde, who is the Meat Lab Manager at SDSU, and we're talking about beef cuts. So Adam, part of your job at SDSU is to run the SDSU Meat Lab retail counter. Can you tell us what are some of the most common questions that people ask you when they come in to buy beef cuts?
Sure. Well, I would say it's a variation of two questions. What's good and what should I buy?
Well, those are pretty broad questions, so how do you help people walk through that and select beef?
Well, I try to narrow it down as quickly as possible by asking what method they're going to use to cook. Grilling or pan frying, crock pot or oven slow roasting, and smoking are the most common methods I hear, and there are beef options that work well for each method. How someone wants to prepare their beef makes a difference in what cut they should buy. All cuts are good, they just need to be cooked in different ways to have a great eating experience.
Adam, you'd probably agree that most people are pretty comfortable selecting and cooking ground beef. So let's talk about something that might be a little bit more difficult, and that would be selecting steaks or roast. Why does cut selection matter for how someone wants to cook those types of beef products?
Well, sure. So fast cooking like grilling works well for the tender cuts because they have less collagen. Slow cooking methods are recommended for cuts that are not as tender and have more collagen.
So can you take a minute and explain what collagen is and why it influences tenderness?
Yep, so collagen is part of the connective tissue structure, and connective tissue helps hold muscles together. Muscles used in movement, like those found in the round or chuck, have more connective tissue, which can mean tougher meat. One way around this tenderness issue is to use a type of slow cooking. Slow cooking methods like smoking or using a crock pot rely on low temperatures, something around 200 to 220 degrees Fahrenheit for long periods of time. This low and slow combination breaks down collagen, resulting in a more tender end product.
So what kind of beef cuts would you recommend for this slow cooking method?
So cuts like the round roast or chuck roast or brisket should be cooked using slow, moist heat cookery to maximize tenderness, juiciness, and flavor. If you're interested in smoking beef, I would recommend cuts that have more fat to help keep the product moist and juicy throughout the process. Examples would be brisket, whole ribeyes, and tri-tip.
So what about steaks? Everybody loves a good steak. So what recommendations can you give for finding a steak that really fits your needs?
Sure. So steaks is kind of a personal choice. Steaks often contain less collagen and can be cooked using a fast, dry method like grilling. A general rule of thumb is the more expensive the steak is, the more tender it should be. But finding that great steak really depends on what you like. If your top priority is tenderness, something like a tenderloin, also known as a fillet, is a great option. If you're looking for something that's extremely flavorful, I would recommend a sirloin. Ribeyes and New York strips also have great flavor and are also very tender.
So what influences flavor in cuts like beef ribeye?
So one reason that ribeyes and New York strips are so flavorful is the marbling. Marbling is the small flecks of fat that are found within the meat. The USDA beef grades you typically see in a grocery store or restaurants are Select, Choice, and Prime, and these are also related to price. Select cuts will have the least amount of marbling, and Prime will have the most and typically be the most expensive.
So those are some great recommendations for finding a great steak that will fit your individual tastes and preferences. But I know there's some new cuts out there that both have a great flavor and are very tender, but they would fall into more of a value category. So can you recommend some of those new cuts?
Sure. So the beef industry has developed several new cuts over the past few years. These cuts include the flat iron, Denver, and chuck eye steak. These may not be available at every grocery store. However, if you check with your retailer, they're really worth it. They are really good steaks.
So you mentioned the flat iron, and I know that cut is really gaining in popularity because they're really tender and flavorful, but I've seen them sold at retail cut a couple of different ways. So could you talk about those differences?
So there's two common ways to find flat irons cut at retail. One cutting method results in an oval shape, and the other is shaped more like a rectangle or square. The oval shape will have a long section of connective tissue running down the center, which can lead to tenderness issues. So I'd recommend buying the rectangular shaped flat iron.
Something we haven't talked about yet is dishes like fajitas, kebabs, and stews. Any recommendations for what cuts to use for those products?
Yeah, for kebabs I would recommend using a sirloin since it's a tender and lean cut to begin with. For fajitas I would recommend using a beef skirt or a flank steak, cook it whole and then slice it thin. And for stew meat, you can use really anything since you're going to slow cook it anyway. All you need to do is cut it into 1-inch cubes. Grocery stores sell these items quite commonly. However, if you do it at home in your own kitchen, you can save yourself some money.
Well, thanks, Adam. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about cut selection from a nutrition standpoint. Holly Swee is the Director of Nutrition and Consumer Information for the South Dakota Beef Industry Council. Holly, the dietary guidelines recommend that people choose lean cuts of meat. So what tips do you have on how people can choose these lean cuts?
Thanks, Amanda. That's a great question. There are actually over 37 lean cuts of meat that meet the government guidelines for leanness. Many of them are family favorites and very popular, such as T-bone, tenderloin, flank steak, and even 95% lean ground beef. You know, a good rule of thumb to remember, if you're not sure which cut is lean, look for the term loin or round in the name, and that's a really good indicator for a lean cut. And also, people don't realize, but there are 9 fresh beef cuts that are extra lean that meet the guidelines for the American Heart Association's Heart Checkmark program. So keep an eye out for that symbol too.
Well, great, thanks, Holly. And thank you, Adam. And for more on this topic and others, visit igrow.org. And for great beef recipes, check out beefitswhatsfordinner.com.